The rooftop restaurant shimmered with gold, sunlight dancing off wine glasses, linen napkins crisp with starch, laughter timed perfectly like rehearsed lines. From where I stood at the entrance, it looked like a magazine cover. Charleston elegance, painted in pastels and pride. And I wasn't in the frame. I moved through the room slowly, the clink of silverware and chime of crystal rising around me like applause meant for someone else. No one turned. Not even my mother. Not even when I passed within arm's reach. My seat, if it could be called that, waited near the patio door, next to a draft and a fire extinguisher. Every other name card glittered in cursive gold. Mine looked printed last minute. Betrayal raised her flute. To Mom, 60, stunning and still running circles around us. Applause. A camera flash. Another toast. I slid into my seat silently, folding my napkin once, then twice, and placed it across my lap like armor. That was the first strike. Not the toast. Not the seating. The pretending. They acted like I'd been there all along. Like I wasn't 3 steps behind, always. You look lovely tonight, Alara, Nolan muttered without making eye contact. I smiled politely. I'd trained my face to wear elegance like a shield. But inside I was documenting. Each omission. Each sidelong glance. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately misplaced. When the dessert spoons chimed, Betrayal rose again. We're expecting. Again. The room exploded. Champagne flowed. Chairs scraped. Phones were lifted like relics. Another vase on the way. Grant bellowed. Marjorie dabbed her eyes. You make motherhood look effortless, sweetheart. My fingers tightened around my glass. The condensation on the crystal cooled my palms, but not the flush creeping up my neck. Grant turned my way, feigning wisdom. Some women think they can chase careers forever, but families don't wait. I tilted my head. Some women were told they couldn't have both, so they built both. Quietly. I said it gently, my voice dipped in silk, not steel. But the message hit. Grant looked away. That applause had once been mine. Degrees, publications, fellowships. Now they sat silent, invisible, like my name in their stories. I kept my smile, knowing full well the next blow was always closer than it seemed. Franklin leaned toward a cousin I hadn't seen in years. She's always drifted, you know. Art school, med school, commitment issues. The cousin snorted. It bounced off the silverware like a slap. I felt nothing. I developed immunity. When you're reduced to punchlines often enough, they lose their sting. Or you just grow quieter. High school, full scholarship. Med school, top 10. Trauma surgery residency, completed. But here, I was a flight risk. A disappointment in pearls. That's how my father preferred it. Failures wrapped in civility, critiques folded in silk. He raised his wine. To Alara for attending. I sipped water but tasted blood. Don't you love how they only remember the versions of you that make them comfortable? My old therapist had once asked. I never answered her, but tonight I did. Silently. Dr. Margaret's voice cut through the static. Alara's hands have saved more lives than most of us in this room will ever touch. That deserves more than silence. A beat. No cheers. No gratitude. Just Marjorie's tight smile and a redirect. Desserts here. Chocolate brulee, everyone's favorite. Voices overlapped. Conversations reset. Margaret had spoken a truth too raw for this room. I met her gaze across the table. No words, just a thank you. She nodded once. brave and tired. A waiter paused beside me. Young. Nervous. He whispered, "If you need anything, ma'am, I'm right here." That landed harder than any toast. Dignity from a stranger. I touched his hand gently and said, "You already gave it." The night cooled. I stepped onto the balcony alone. Charleston stretched below, soft lights, distant jazz, the hush of a city pretending to sleep. They hadn't just neglected me. They'd curated their lives without me, pruned me out like a dead leaf. I leaned into the rail, steadying my breath the same way I did before an incision. Slow, precise, practiced. "They didn't forget me," I whispered. "They deleted me." I remembered something my mentor once told me after I lost my first patient. Power doesn't scream. It waits. Then it walks in calmly and changes everything. I looked at my watch. It was time. Not for them. For me. The breeze carried laughter from inside, the kind I used to be a part of once. Now I watched from the edge. For the first time tonight, I didn't want them to see me. I wanted them to feel me. The valet light reflected in streaks off the black, rain-slick pavement as the limo pulled up. Engine low, precise, no rush. I hadn't seen that car in years, but I knew its markings. Federal. I didn't need to guess which department. Only a handful of government bodies rolled in with that kind of hush-backed confidence. The party behind me, all candlelight and laughter, paused mid-sentence. I didn't look back. I inhaled once, steady. That vehicle didn't belong to Charleston high society dinners. It belonged to choices I'd made, lives I'd guarded, and silence I'd signed my name to. Agent Declan Reeve opened the door without a word. Rain touched the tip of my heels as I stepped toward him. Inside, I caught it, the sound of nothing. No chatter. No silverware. Just a held breath stretched across linen-covered tables. I'd worn their rejection like a second skin. Now I wore exposure like a tailored coat. Michael entered the lobby 5 seconds after I did. Not hurried, intentional. On each side of him, our children walked. Not like props, not like pawns. Just small, warm presences with their own brightness. Junie tugged at his coat and whispered something. I knew her tone before her words reached me. Wide-eyed curiosity, not fear. The room's silence fractured. One glass slipped from someone's hand. A fork dropped, a gasp caught, and never landed. My mother stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. Brielle's eyes widened, and her mouth moved. No sound came. Grant looked down, adjusted his sleeve like it mattered. And I stood still. This wasn't spectacle. This was fact. My children's shoes clicked softly against marble tile. My husband's hand found the small of my back. They weren't weapons. They were my truth. What they called absence had always been presence, just not for them. Brielle moved before anyone else, grabbing my wrist with a force I hadn't expected. She pulled me onto the narrow balcony. Glass doors clattering, shut behind us. The rain misted sideways, catching my blouse, cooling my pulse. "You think this is fair?" she hissed. "You show up after years of hiding with that?" Her chin jerked toward the window, toward Michael and our kids, now being offered drinks by a confused but dutiful waiter. "I didn't hide," I said. "I built a life. One none of you asked about." Her voice rose, cracked, then dropped again. "You think that makes it okay? To blindside Mom? To make us look like fools?" I looked at her, really looked. Same cheekbones. Same narrow mouth. But her anger wasn't about morality, it was about control. "You wanted the version of me that didn't need anything," I said quietly. "But people like me, we survive. We don't vanish. We just stopped performing. Inside, the murmur of resumed conversation pressed against the glass. But the storm above was louder. She trembled. I didn't, because I'd lived through darker weather than this balcony ever would. Back at the table, Junie stood beside my chair, too short to reach her drink. Her voice carried, soft but unshakable. "Grandma, Grandpa, when did you last visit us?" The room stilled. My mother blinked. My father looked at his plate as though the answer might be hiding in the gravy. My son shifted closer to his sister. A cousin cleared their throat. But no one spoke. Children don't know how to lie politely. That skill comes later, taught by omission, reinforced by silence. Junie's question wasn't an accusation. It was memory or the absence of one. I felt it land in the room like a slow collapse. I leaned down to her level, smoothed the wrinkle in her dress. She looked up at me with complete trust. Sometimes the loudest truths arrive, wrapped in innocence. I rose to stand. No raised voice, no righteous monologue, just the firmness of someone who no longer needed applause to confirm her worth. "You don't owe me anything," I began, and that silenced them more than any demand could. "But you don't get to narrate my life while ignoring the parts that matter." I turned toward my children. Dinner's ready. No one should go hungry waiting on dignity. I touched Junie's shoulder. "Let's eat." Then I looked back at the faces that had shaped and shattered parts of me. If you want to be part of this life, you don't get to cherry-pick the holidays. You show up for the hard days too. For the silence, the healing, the real. Declan began clearing empty plates, his movements practiced but purposeful. Not just service, closure. The chatter had thinned to whispers. Guests peeled away. Some nodded awkwardly at me. Others didn't look at all. My mother still sat with her hands clasped too tightly, knuckles white. Betrayal hadn't returned from the balcony. I lifted my glass, water, not wine, and finished it in one motion. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't sure if that was strength or something more final. I heard Declan gently ask the pianist to stop playing. No more melodies for memory to cling to. Just the soft sound of forks being gathered. The storm outside had become a low hum. They had lost more than comfort tonight. They had lost the privilege of pretending. I turned toward the door. The limo was still waiting, a small beacon in the wet dark. As I stepped outside, the wind pulled my coat loose. I didn't fix it. The air was clean, unsettled mine. I glanced once through the glass, saw their fractured reflections against candlelight and guilt. And I let it go. If silence had been their weapon, tonight I dismantled it with light. The morning light filtered through the blinds and settled quietly on the kitchen island. I poured tea without shaking, each splash deliberate, each breath measured. The house was silent, but the air hung heavy, like old dust refusing to settle. I replayed last night's faces, the intrusive hush, the unspoken reckonings. What they didn't say spoke louder than what they did. I walked over to the locked oak cabinet, the one untouched since Father passed. In there sat papers stamped with estate numbers, deeds, tax forms. I opened it, fingers grazing faded ink and outdated signatures. I closed it immediately. I wasn't salvaging illusions. I was remembering reality. Michael was there, leaning against the doorframe, gentle in a way that felt real. He didn't reach out. He didn't need to. "You didn't break them," he said softly. "You just stopped pretending." I traced the rim of my cup. Stability can begin with that simple truth. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. I didn't expect it. On the other end was Franklin, his voice older, softer. I watched the footage, he said quietly. You looked like your grandmother that night, stubborn, bright. I closed my eyes. That visitation had changed everything. I waited. He continued, we wanted Brielle to shine. Maybe too much. You were always too strong to need us. I answered with calm. Needing love isn't a weakness. But I stopped needing approval the day you sold my silence. I let the words hang. Silence. Then, I'm sorry. Not the word I had waited for, but enough to feel the crack in the wall. That same week, my attorney presented a letter to Brielle and Mother. It laid out clear terms, mediated estate discussion, required psychological evaluation before any family contact, no transfer of funds without mutual agreement. The letter was legal, clean, necessary. When Michael warned me, they'll call it war, I paused, resting my chin on my wrist. I replied quietly, then they never understood what peace looks like. I added a personal note addressed to Mother. If we can't be a family in truth, then I'll be one in silence. I sent the letter. I didn't burn bridges. I locked them behind a gate. Control isn't loud. It's quiet and firm. A few days later, Brielle appeared unannounced at the hospital where I volunteered once a week. She hovered by a nurse's station, eyes red, not with tears but with fear. She said, you were never supposed to win. You were supposed to fade. I didn't answer. I walked calmly toward her, away from patience and prying eyes. I kept my voice soft, measured. And yet here we are, I said. Still sisters. Still broken. A patient waiting nearby looked up. I nodded at her with gentle assurance. Then I told Brielle, hurt people don't scare me. They just shouldn't lead. There was no loud victory, just a quiet setting back of boundaries. The mask cracked, loud enough for everyone to see. A few days later came Mother's call. Let's have dinner. For peace. I agreed on one condition, honesty. At the table, she tried to steer conversation, to lull the moment with pleasantries. I set a stack of photocopied pages before her. Lines of criticism, neglect, dismissals, written over decades, never meant to be saved. No accusations, just records. Junie, my niece, reached for the papers. I gently covered the stack. No, sweet girl. That history belongs to us, not you. The room froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My presence filled the space. If forgiveness is a performance, I said softly, I'd rather be absent. I stood, collected my coat, and walked out. They sat, stunned by civility dressed as departure. Back home, I placed the copy of the journal into a safe. I slid the door closed, the lock clicking like truth sealed. My daughter looked up, curious. Are you still angry? She asked. I smiled, calm. I'm not angry. I am awake. A few days later, a letter arrived. No envelope, just a photograph. A shot of me and Nolan as kids, arms around each other. No words, no apology, but a start. I folded the picture carefully and tucked it beside the safe. I stood in the quiet room. Lights low, air still. I had drawn a clean line. I had reclaimed the narrative. They wanted an apology. I gave them a boundary instead.